So thanks for joining us today. My name is Logan Ury. I'm really excited to have Gretchen Rubin with us. I actually work in a team called the Irrational Lab, and we study human behavior and products at Google. So I'm particularly interested in all of Gretchen's work, and we're lucky enough to have her with us today. I'll ask some questions until around 1:40, and then I'll open it up to you. So Gretchen Rubin is one of the most provoking and influential writers on the linked subjects of happiness, habits, and human nature. She's the author of many books, including the New York Times bestsellers, The Happiness Project and Happier at Home. Rubin has an enormous following in print and online, and her books have sold more than 1 million copies worldwide in more than 30 languages. Rubin started her career in law and was clerking for Justice Sandra Day O'Connor when she realized she wanted to be a writer. She lives in New York City with her husband and 2 daughters. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to introduce Gretchen Rubin.
Well, I'm very happy to be here.
So I want to start just by finding out about the transition from clerking to becoming a writer. What was that like?
Well, I was lucky because a lot of times people know they don't want to do something, but they don't know what they do want to do. And I was fortunate because one day when I was doing my clerkship and I was going for a walk at lunchtime and I was staring up at the Capitol dome against the blue sky, and I thought, if I were to write something that was interesting to me, that was interesting to everybody else in the world, what would I write about? And I thought, power, money, fame, sex. And all of a sudden it hit me, and I just started this giant research project on power, money, fame, and sex. And I was doing it in my free time. I would stay late at work, and I was working on it on the weekends. And finally it occurred to me that this is the kind of thing that people do as a job. They write a book like this as their job. And I was treating it as a hobby, and then I thought, well, maybe I should do it as a job. And my husband and I were getting ready to move to New York, and I thought, and I couldn't think of a law job that I wanted. You know, here I was, I had a lot of feathers in my cap as a lawyer, and I couldn't think of a single law job that I wanted. So I thought, well, you know, I'd rather fail as a writer than succeed as a lawyer. And this is my time to do it, because I'm moving to New York. If I get a law job, I'll probably never leave it. So I should try to get a book written. And so that's when I tried to get an agent and write a book proposal and all that.
So you moved from money, fame, sex, and power to happiness?
Well, I wrote a book. So I know it sounds strange, but really my real subject is human nature. That's the thing that's always interesting to me. So I wrote about power, money, fame, sex. It was called A User's Guide, and it's sort of like the preppy handbook for power, money, fame, and sex. So it was satirical. Then I wrote biographies of Winston Churchill and JFK, because these are such exaggerated, they're so huge, you can see human nature more clearly. I wrote this weird book called Profane Waste, because for a long time I was obsessed with the question of why owners would destroy their own possessions. And then I got to the Happiness Project. But to me, they all seem very interrelated, even though from the outside it's sort of bizarre shifts.
Yes. So I think a lot of people in this room are really interested in everything around happiness. What are some of the biggest misconceptions around happiness?
Well, one of the most complicated and emotionally charged areas within happiness is the role of money in happiness. And you know, people will often say, well, money can't buy happiness, and it can't, but it can buy a lot of things that contribute powerfully to happiness. And so money has a real role to play, but it's a question of how are you spending your money? Because you could buy a bike or you could buy cocaine, and those are probably going to have different outcomes. And people have different needs. You know, one person might have a lot of people depending on them, and one person, you know, might live alone with a turtle. And so the level of money that would make them feel safe and secure would be different. So one is related to money. And I think one is this idea that there's that certain things make people happy. Music makes people happy. Travel makes people happy. Shopping makes people happy. Wine makes people happy. None of those things make me happy. You know, there is no one size fits all. We all have to know what makes us happy. And sometimes that's surprisingly hard to do. So I think the idea that there's something that we can all just point to, except relationships probably. Relationships do make people happier. But what those relationships look like are very different for different people depending on, you know, how many relationships they like to have.
So speaking of what makes you happy, what single change that you made in your life contributed the most to your personal happiness?
Oh, well, switching from being a lawyer to a writer. Oh. For sure, yeah.
What about through the book, through the experiment?
Through the book. Oh my gosh, there were so many things. I mean, a lot of There were a lot of things, and I keep working on this, which is really, I have we were talking about this, I have an intense personality, I have kind of a short fuse, and so a lot of habits and resolutions and everything that I've done, everything from going to bed on time to trying to underreact to problems, I mean, a million different things, trying to just stay calm and lighthearted and have a sense of humor, I mean, not take it up to 11, like an opera star every time something goes wrong.
And what are some of the easy things that people in this room or people watching could do to be happier?
Get enough sleep. How many people here regularly get 7 hours of sleep a night? Okay, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Huh?
Liars.
Yeah, liars. How many people here regularly use a snooze alarm? Oh, it's an instrument of torture. Regularly behave. Well, and then relationships. Really, like when you look at people who are happier, they are the ones that have deep, meaningful relationships. To be happy, we really need relationships. And so anything that you can do to broaden your relationships or deepen your relationships is something that's likely to have a big happiness payoff. I'm a big fan myself of joining groups because I think groups are a great way to stay in touch with a lot of people. So those are some of the things.
So transitioning from happiness to your newest book, what role do habits play in contributing to people's happiness?
Well, it's interesting. Research suggests that about 40% of everyday life is governed by habits. And so habits are the invisible architecture of everyday life. If you have habits that work for you, you are much more likely to be happier, healthier, and more productive. If you have habits that do not work for you, that is going to be much more difficult. And I got drawn into the subject of habits from happiness because whenever I was researching and thinking and talking to people about happiness so much, and very often I noticed a pattern that was when people would talk about either a big gain that they had experienced or more often like a challenge that they kept facing about happiness, it was something that to me at its core looked like a habit problem. And so I became increasingly interested in this question of like, well, why do people have trouble forming certain habits if they say they want them? And if sometimes they can form them, and why can they? And then sometimes they can't, and trying to understand what was going on.
So what do you say if someone says, oh, that seems so exhausting, or it's going to take away the spontaneity from my life?
Well, this is the thing about habits. There's good things about habits and bad things. So the good things about habits is that they are freeing and energizing, because when something's a habit, we don't have to use decision making and we don't have to use self-control. So I don't decide to get up at 6 a.m. I don't decide whether to skip dessert. I'm not using my willpower. I just don't. I made that decision long ago. So, people sometimes say like, I want to go through my day making healthy choices. I'm like, no, you don't. Because if you're trying to make a lot of healthy choices, a lot of the time you're probably going to make the wrong choice. You want to choose once, make it a habit, put it on autopilot, and then that just is going to run, and you don't have to use decision making, you don't have to use self-control. However, the downside of habits is that they speed time and they deaden. So if your first month on a job lasts longer than your 5th year on a job, because everything speeds up when it's on a habit. And also your response to a situation is going to be less intense. So if you're doing something for the first time, it's this spontaneous thing, it's going to be more intense. Whereas if it's something that you're doing every day, it's going to be deadened. But this can be good too. You deaden pleasure, but you also deaden negative emotions like anxiety. If there's something that makes you anxious, probably the more you do it, the less anxious you're going to feel. I heard a guy, an expert on anxiety, talking, and a woman said, well, I get very, very anxious every time I have to get off a ski lift. And he said, strangely, it's because you don't get off ski lifts enough. If you got off a ski lift 3 times a day, you would be in the habit of it, and that your anxiety would drop. It's that it's just novel enough that you can have this big stress reaction. So habits, the deadening can be helpful, but often we experience it as like, oh, I don't enjoy my cup of coffee in the morning anymore. I'm driving to work, I don't even see the beautiful scenery because it's just like, it just deadens, speeds away.
Yeah. One of my favorite parts of the book was about abstaining and how you can make powerful changes in your life just by not making a decision about it or making a decision about it once.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, abstaining. Okay, so the strategy so I have 21 strategies in the book. These are strategies that, don't feel like, oh my gosh, 21, it's too many. It's good. You can have a lot to pick and choose from. And the strategy of abstaining is interesting because it's a strategy that works extremely well for some people and does not work at all for other people. So it's very important to know if you're an abstainer or a moderator. for abstainers, it's easier to do something not at all. It's easier to give it up altogether. I can have no Thin Mints, and I can have 10 Thin Mints, but I cannot have 2 Thin Mints. It's easier to have none. Once something's off the table, it just goes away. I'm not bothered by it, but once I start, I have trouble stopping. It's like all or nothing. And then there are people who are moderators, and moderators get kind of panicky if they're told they can't have something ever. They need to know they can have it sometimes, they can have it, occasionally. One of the things that many moderators will do, this was a pattern that puzzled me for the longest time, is they will keep a bar of fine chocolate squirreled away somewhere. And once a day, they will eat 1 square of that bar of fine chocolate. Now, my whole day would be like, a square now, a square later, it's my birthday, I'm on vacation, I was so good, I'll eat the whole thing, I'm not gonna eat anything today, so, I would eat that bar. But a moderator likes to have just a little bit. And so it's really important to know whether abstaining works for you or moderating works better for you. So how many people here hearing this description think that they're abstainers? How many people think they're moderators? Okay, so now you see the point of conflict, right? Because it's like the moderator's like, well, let's just buy a carton of ice cream and keep it in the freezer, and you can just, learn to control yourself. And the abstainer's like, I'm gonna eat the whole thing. Don't bring it in the house. So it's hard. And this is something that works also for any kind of strong temptation. And as I imagine you guys are well aware, it's something that some people have to do with technology. Like my sister could not play a little bit of Candy Crush. She had to delete it from all of her devices. So sometimes when people can't do something a little bit, they have to give it up altogether. And that sounds harder because it sounds more extreme and more rigid and more demanding. But if you are an abstainer, it's easier. It's the lazy way. It's easy to give something up altogether. It's much, much, much harder to try to be moderate if you are the abstainer personality.
So one thing I really found helpful in the book is understanding to change our habits, we must figure out ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people in this room read your books and they follow your blog because they do want to hack their lives and improve. Yeah. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the 4 tendencies and how that's helped people make habits.
Okay. So everything in the book, I have to say, this is the thing that is the most original. It was definitely the most intellectually challenging. It took me months and months and months of deep pondering to come up with the 4 tendencies. So I'm going to outline the 4 tendencies, and then I'm going to go through them and ask you to raise your hand, because whenever I speak, I'm very curious to see what the distribution is. Okay, so the 4 and it starts out sounding really boring. So just hang in there with me, because I promise there's payoff. But it really does sound boring when I start. So this has to do with how you respond to the idea of an expectation. So there are outer expectations, like a work deadline or a request from a spouse or a traffic regulation. And then there are inner expectations, which is like your own desire to keep a New Year's resolution or your own desire to get back into meditation. The first category of people are upholders. Upholders respond readily to outer and inner expectations alike. So they meet a work deadline without too much trouble. They keep a New Year's resolution without much trouble. It's very important to them to meet external expectations, but it's just as important or more important for them to meet their expectations for themselves. Next, questioners. Questioners question all expectations. They'll do it if it makes sense to them. They hate anything arbitrary or irrational. They want to know, why am I listening to you? They want reasons and justification, sometimes too much. And so in a way, they make everything an inner expectation because they'll do it if it passes muster with them. So it's an inner expectation. Then obligers. Obligers readily meet outer expectations, but they have trouble meeting their expectations for themselves. So for instance, and I talk about this at the very beginning of the book because it was like a very clarifying moment for me, a friend of mine said, why can't I exercise? In high school, I was on the track team and I never missed track practice, but I can't go running now. Why? Because she was an obliger. When there was a team, when there was a coach, she could meet the external expectation, but she can't go running on her own because that's just an inner expectation, and so that's harder to meet. And then finally, rebels. Rebels resist all expectations, outer and inner alike. They want to do what they want to do, when they want to do it, in their own way. If you ask or tell them to do something, they're very likely to do the opposite. And they sometimes become frustrated because they don't even want to tell themselves what to do. So they resist outer and inner alike. Okay, so upholders. Readily meets outer and inner expectation, upholder. Yeah, that's definitely my tendency. Okay. Next, questioners. Questioners question all expectations. Okay. Next, obligers. Obligers readily meet outer, struggle to keep inner. And then rebels. Rebels resist both outer and inner alike. Okay.
My theory was there would be more rebels at Google.
Well, I've spoken to groups that had no rebels. And
Any themes among groups with no rebels?
the theme you would expect. They tend to be places where there's like a super high emphasis on keeping rules. Strangely, the group that had the highest percentage of rebels, well, I should start by saying rebel is by far the smallest category. Very, very few people are rebels. But what was surprising to me was that very few people are upholders. It's a very small category. These are the extremes. When I was starting this book, I did not realize that I was part of the freaky fringe, but I am. But the group that I spoke to that had by far the highest percentage of rebels, it was still on absolute terms a small number, but in terms of like the number of hands that went up, I was astounded, was when I spoke to a group of Christian ministers. And there's a whole thing that I won't go into about why that is, about this. Rebels are often attracted, strangely, to areas of high regulation. But by far, most people are questioners or obligers. I think obliger is in the slight lead. There's a quiz on my site if you want to take it. Like 117,000 people now have taken it. But most people are questioners, obligers, overwhelmingly. And this is, I think, I couldn't totally get a sense of it, but I think that was pretty much what we saw here.
So one of the things about you that I'm so impressed by is your productivity, how often you post to your blog. You say you answer every email within 24 hours.
No, not within 24 hours, but yeah.
What's your email rule?
I don't have a rule. I'm an upholder, so I'm like, I will answer that email, so yeah.
So how are you so productive? Can you share some of your productivity tips with us?
I mean, that's what's funny. Like what I realized, a lot of people who write books like this are upholders, and we're like, why is it so hard? People should just do what I do. It's really simple. And then you're like, no, it's because that's your nature.
Yeah. So you think a lot of authors are upholders?
No, I think a lot of authors of things like about productivity and efficiency.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
I don't know if anybody here has read Laura Vanderkam. She's a time management expert. I really love her stuff. And she was telling me that she was in labor and like really about to have the baby, like barely made it, and she still wouldn't let her husband park illegally in the parking lot. But because she's an upholder. But I think one of the things is regular work. That's what works for me, is to work a little bit every day, and to really always stay inside a project. I have a friend, she's a writer, he's a painter, and she said they had this rule, like, could you work for 10 minutes? Meaning, are you so in your project that if you even had 10 loose minutes that you could sit down and get something done because it's just in your mind so vividly. And so I think that's part of what works for me. But I have to say, though, I always thought that was like a standard thing that everybody should do in order to be productive and efficient. But one of the things I learned from the book, there's one chapter on the strategy of distinctions, which is understanding how people are alike and how they're different. Because a lot of times, like, I assume everybody would do better if they worked a little bit every day. Because, like, isn't that the best way? No, it's the best way for me. So there's marathoners like me who like to do a little bit steadily. We feel like that helps our creativity and productivity. But then there are sprinters. Sprinters like the adrenaline of a deadline. They like to do everything like up against that end. They feel like that's what crystallizes their thoughts. So that's when they're most productive. And if they start too early, they kind of burn out and waste time, and the whole thing stretches out. And it was a real revelation, because I just thought that they were being irresponsible. Like, why would you possibly wait like that? But then as I would really talk to people about their work habits, that's really how they work best. And there's no right way or wrong way, but you can imagine in a team situation it can be really hard. And I've heard from a lot of people saying, like, oh, well, I worked in this law firm for this partner who was a sprinter, and I couldn't work like that. It seemed crazy to me. Or I was talking to a guy who was he led a software team, and he's like, oh, that's when teams come together, that's when the great ideas flow. And I'm like, no, for you, I couldn't work like that, So it's like understanding that maybe people have different work styles, work paces, and so if you talk about like what are the best habits for productivity, should you do it first thing in the morning? Not if you're a night person, because like that's when you're probably at your foggiest. They might do it at 8 o'clock at night, which is when I'm can barely speak. So it's hard to say, because it's really about that individual fit.
That's what I found really empowering about the book, was saying, oh, that didn't work for me because I'm this different type of person, but I am a morning person, so I've started making habits based on that.
No, because I think a lot of people get discouraged because something doesn't work, and like on paper it sounds like a great idea, and then you're like, well, maybe it's just not suitable for you.
Yeah. So what would you say to managers in the room who are trying to figure out how to make their team happiest and most productive?
Well, I think the thing to do is to really look at what is the reality of how people behave, and not say like, well, this is the best way to do it. And because maybe you have to work with different types. Like, let's say that you're managing obligers. Well, then you need to have forms of external accountability. You can't be like, well, will you just go do this and tell me when you're done? Because it just might never get done. You need to have a deadline. You need to have a sense of supervision, a sense that there's external accountability. But obligers often burn out. So if you're a manager, you need to encourage your obligers to take time, to not to push themselves too hard, because it's going to be hard for them not to meet an external expectation even when they're really at the end of their rope. So you have to find ways to force them to relax and to say no. Questioners, a lot of times in teams, there's one person who's like, why are we doing it this way? Why are we doing it all? Why am I listening to you? Is this the best way? Isn't there another way? Did you think about this? Maybe we should interview somebody else. And everybody's like, we've all decided. Let it go. Somebody, and questioners sometimes get frustrated with themselves. Like a friend of mine said, I have analysis paralysis. Like, I always want just a little bit more information. I don't like acting without perfect information. But the fact is, often we don't have perfect information, and we can't wait for perfect information. And so part of it with questioners is giving them the justification, taking them through the rationale, and then also helping them to say, like, we're going to interview 5 people, but not 50 people. We're going to look at this for this amount of time and to this degree, and then we're going to move on, and like so that they can kind of, it's bounded. So there's a lot of ways that it can come up in teams.
I really like the part of your book how you name things, because I think it's also very empowering, because then I can see somebody saying to their manager, I'm an obliger, so I need you to create more accountability. I think naming things is great. Maybe you can talk a little bit about loophole rejecting. That was one of my favorite terms that you coined.
So I love all my 21 strategies, but the funniest strategy, and the one that I was always, how you always want to work on the things that are already the best, is I was always tinkering with the loophole chapter because I love it so much. So there's 10 categories of loopholes. They are all hilarious because we are such advocates for ourselves. So loophole is something you're not mindfully making an exception to a habit, which we can all do. We're all grown-ups. We can do whatever we want. But a loophole is when in the heat of the moment, it's like a cell phone searching for a signal. You're like, wait a minute, I'm off the hook here. I forgot. I'm going to be so good tomorrow. It doesn't matter what I do today. All right. Or, it's my birthday. I'm on vacation. It's raining. I hurt my foot. And so there's 10 categories, and they're all incredibly popular. Everybody has a few favorites. My favorite is the false choice, which is, I'm too busy writing to exercise. No, really, the day is long enough for me to do both those things most of the time. Another very popular one is the fake self-actualization loophole, which is when in the moment you're like, you only live once. Life's too short not to have a brownie.
The YOLO loophole.
Yeah, YOLO. I have to take advantage of this opportunity or miss out forever. I mean, a pumpkin spice latte. Who could say no? So that's fake self-actualization. Another one is planning to fail, which is when you very carefully arrange a set of circumstances so that then you're in a place where no one could expect you to resist. And my favorite story like this was told to me by a friend, and he had a friend who had a gambling problem, and so he ran into this guy who lived in Los Angeles, and he ran into the guy. He said, "How are you doing?" And the guy said, "I'm not doing so well because I lost a lot of money gambling." He said, "Well, I thought you weren't going to do that anymore." He said, "Well, I was in Vegas." "Why were you in Las Vegas?" He said, "Well, I just bought a new car and I wanted to take it for a test drive to Las Vegas." That's planning to fail. But one of the most dangerous loopholes, because it's absolutely true and it works in every situation, is the one coin loophole. And this comes from an ancient teaching story which says, would you say that one coin makes a man rich? You would say no. One coin does not make a man rich. But what if you give him another coin? And what if you give him another coin? At some point, you have to say that a man has become rich because one coin made him rich. And this is the thing with habits. What is one trip to the gym going to do for me? What's one cupcake? Why should I bother to wear a helmet today? What are the chances I'm going to get in an accident today? But the only way you get the benefit of a habit, the only way you form a habit is one coin after one coin after one coin. But at any particular moment, that one, why should I work on my PhD thesis today? I'm not going to turn it in for 2 years. It always works. It always works. But the fact is, that's the only way we do anything is by doing it right now. And people will often shift between these two at their convenience. Like, well, it's really important to me to read to my child, but I'm not going to do it tonight. But it's like, how are you ever going to do it if you don't do it tonight? So it's a really insidious loophole because it's always accurate. But if you really follow it, then you would never do anything. But they're all so fun. They're all so imaginative.
Yeah. One part of your book I found really interesting was how hard it is to start a habit the second time.
Yes.
So you put a lot of effort in the first time.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's just this thing that I noticed, like starting over is harder. And many people would say like, oh, I did this thing and it was not so hard. But then for some reason I stopped and then I had to start over and then I couldn't do it again. And so it's very important whenever you have a good habit that you don't want to allow yourself to stop. Let's say you go on vacation, you don't want to conceive that as a stopping, but really always have a plan for what happens on the other side. Well, maybe I can't do it for this month, but on this date I'm going back to the gym or I'm going to start doing my Spanish class again or whatever it is. And weirdly, a strange stopping point is reaching a goal. You would think reaching a goal would energize people and help them keep their habits. But actually hitting a goal is a kind of finish line. You feel like, oh, I've achieved my goal. I did a 60-day sugar detox. But really, if you're trying to form a habit, you want it to keep going. So the finish line is dangerous. You maybe want to think of it as a milestone. It's an exciting milestone, but it's not a finish line.
Yeah, that resonated a lot with me. So Google products are immensely popular. For example, there's over 500 million Gmail users.
Yeah.
With this in mind, and with probably people in this room who work on those products, what are some things that Google could do to help people through the insights that you've had about happiness and habits?
Interesting. Well, it's always good to make everything that you want to do to be very convenient, and anything you don't want to do to be very inconvenient. So I'm trying to think of what.
So there's YouTube,
Gmail,
search.
maybe you could have a thing on your Google Maps that's blacks out a certain kind of thing. I'm not going to see any. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, somebody's speaking from experience, right? Yeah. It's gonna just wipe it out so you can't find it. Or there are ways to block certain. That's something that people do is they block off shut off their internet part of the time, where they shut off certain sites.
What about notifications, reminders? Do you use that?
I don't, but some people really do find that helpful. One thing along those lines is one habit that many people want to have is the habit of going to bed earlier, which is very challenging for people for a lot of different reasons. But something that works for a lot of people is to set an alarm that reminds you to go to bed. And you almost need the snooze alarm for going to bed because you kind of need that time to be okay, it's time to start getting to bed, and then it's actually your bedtime. So that kind of notification, or anything that you're doing. Except some people, they use a mindfulness notification, so this bell rings and that reminds you to be mindful, but I was thinking that would be so deeply annoying to me that there's this bell going off randomly throughout my day. It would not make me mindful in a good way. Notifications can be.
Speaking of mindfulness, I thought, not to give away a big part of the book, but kind of your journey through meditation, and ultimately you gave it up.
My thwarted journey through meditation.
That was very humanizing for me when I read it, because I was like, oh, Gretchen's not perfect. There's, she tries to do this habit and she couldn't. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
So I felt I'm doing all this happiness research and trying out all these things, and then it was how was it that I had never tried meditation? Because this is one of the top things that people are always suggesting that you try, and I'd heard all these people talking about how great it was and how much it had done for their happiness. So even though it had never appealed to me, and I kind of had this identity as I'm the person who doesn't, I'm the happiness expert who doesn't meditate, then I thought I really should do it. I should let go of that part of my identity, which is not helpful to me, and I should try meditation. So I did what I always do, which is I got a bunch of books and read about what you were supposed to do, and I had my whole routine, and I did it every morning. I did it every morning for months and months. And I got very excited about the idea of embracing this new part of my identity. It was going to be this new thing, and maybe it was going to be I was going to have this exciting experience, and it would be really interesting, and I would, have my meditation experience, and to be able to talk to all the other people who were doing it. And it did nothing for me. It just started driving me crazy. Which, you know, and people who meditate will be like, that's because you needed it so desperately, and if only you'd worked through it, you would have gone through. And I kind of did that for like a month, where I'm like, I'm gonna break through.
Yeah.
And in the end, I was just like, I have to let this go. This is not helping me. This is actually not helping me, because I'm finding it frustrating, and so I gave it up. But the funny thing was that it was hard to give it up, because I had kind of attached to this fantasy of myself as a person who did meditation, and so then I had to, just as I had to embrace that identity, then I had to relinquish that identity, because I wanted to be the kind of person who meditated, but that's not the same thing as actually wanting to meditate. So I felt like I had to be Gretchen and drop the meditation. I'll probably try it again sometime, because people are always telling me I should do it. So I'll probably experiment again.
Oh, Be Gretchen is one of your secrets of adulthood.
Yeah.
And I've been using a lot of those. Food tastes better if you eat it with your hands.
Yeah,
it's true.
I know, that's sort of gross, but it is true, I think.
So as a final question, before we open it up to the audience, I'll ask you what I like to ask people who visit, which is, if you could take over the Google homepage for one day and write a line of text under the logo, what would you say?
I would say, perform the easiest good deed that you could ever perform and sign up to be an organ donor. Because organ donation is something that almost everybody supports. Not almost everybody, but many, many people support. And they just haven't signed the organ registry. And so then if the opportunity, and it's a very rare privilege to die in a way that would allow you to donate your organs. And then in this moment of like terrible catastrophe, their families don't know what to do. And then this opportunity for all these other people's lives to be saved is lost. And to me, it just seems like so sad that there are all these people who would be happy to do it, and they just haven't been organized enough to do it. And so like it's just, and all you have to do is like click for, is just to actually sign up to do it, or even just tell the people around you that you want to be an organ donor, because they'll be asked, does this person want to donate their organs? And if they know the answer, then they'll do it. And this has special resonance for me, because my husband had hepatitis C, and so he was a really very likely candidate for needing a liver transplant. And so it just became very obvious to me how there's this very high need for organs, and all these people who would like to give their organs, but it's just not known in time. And the miraculous thing is that there was this new drug that went on the market last year, and so my husband is cured of hepatitis C, which he's had for like 30 years. It's an amazing thing. But I'm still so frustrated by organ donation, because it does seem like there's this disconnect between what people really want to do. And the fact is, it's like, if you want to do a good deed, pay it forward, random acts of kindness. It's like, it takes you no time, no effort, and you're never going to, it's not even like donating blood where you have to show up and like drink your orange juice. This is nothing. You'll never hear about it again.
You just have to die.
Yeah, well, but that's long, but that's out of your hands. So there's no effort on your part. It's like the easiest good deed that you'll ever do, and it's transformative, it's huge. Like something like 7 people's lives can be saved or transformed. So I think that I would make a pitch for organ donation if I had that.
That was a surprising and beautiful answer. Thanks. Do you know all the behavioral economics research about organ donations?
Oh yeah, believe me, I do. Yes.
Do you guys know
all kinds
about
of complications with state legislatures, and they often advocate for things that are not politically realistic in the United States, like having the default be that you opt in and you have to opt out. That's not going to go over well in the United States. Like that's not. It's a good idea. It's not politically realistic. So but there's a huge amount of it.
Dan Ariely has this funny line: "I hope my kids grow up to be form designers." Because of how much it matters whether it's an opt-in or an opt-out.
Yes. Or one of the things that it turns out is, if you say, if the question on the driver's license is, do you want to be an organ donor, yes or no? You don't want that. That is really bad. You want it to be yes or not at this time. You don't want people to start having the identity of, no, I don't want to donate my organs. It's like, right now, I don't feel like donating my organs, but not at this time.
That's interesting. I've never heard that.
No, very, very important, because one state did that, and it had real consequences. So you're exactly right. Form design is so powerful, and
it's what you see with updates on your computer. Yes, not now.
Yes,
all those things. Same
later.
Thing. We should chat about this. Great. So I want to give you all time to ask questions. So Bjorn has a microphone. So ask the question. Oh, I don't need to repeat it.
And you get a gold star if you ask the first question.
I think one of the ways to be more productive and have good habits is to kind of come up with systems for yourself.
Right.
But like you said, like everybody's different. It's not immediately obvious whether a particular system is going to work well for you.
Right.
So you need to be able to try it on for size and commit to it, and then at some point evaluate.
Yes.
Do you have any recommendations for how long to try something before you turn around and evaluate it, or how to go about evaluation so that you can, because you really have to commit to that time. If you're constantly questioning whether this is really a good idea, you'll never make it, right?
Right. Now, there is sort of an urban legend that it's either 28 days or 21 days or 30 days to form a habit, but actually that's not true. There is no magic number. There was a study that said that 66 days was the average time, but that means nothing because it means some were longer and some were shorter, and some people could form habits easily and some didn't form them at all, and some habits were easy and some habits were hard. So like the number 66 is kind of, that doesn't tell you anything. And I think there is really no answer, because some habits, like if it clicks in right away, you can sort of feel that this is the way that's working for you. And sometimes you're right, you have to let it play out. And I don't think there's an easy way to know, except that I think you can kind of tell when something is going against your grain, that it's not coming easily. Like, again, with the night people trying to exercise in the morning, like there's every day it's a huge struggle. Like it never is coming easily. It's never feeling like it's helping. And so that's when you want to say, this is not right for me. But I also think that you can design it up front. Like you can think about I think if you think about yourself and the strategies that you could try, you can have a lot more, you can avoid a lot of false starts because you're designing things in a way that are going to work for you from the beginning. You know, a lot of times people are like, well, this is what worked for Benjamin Franklin. You know, it's like, well, it's going to work for you if you're a lot like Benjamin Franklin, but otherwise, no. And another thing that's very helpful when you're trying to evaluate what might work for you is, was there a time in your past when you had good success? Like my friend, there was a clue to her that she had no trouble with this habit when she was on the track team. She didn't understand what the clue was. The clue was external accountability, but there was there. And I talked to somebody who was like, well, I thought I hated to cook. But then when I thought back on it, I realized when I lived in a group house after college, I cooked all the time and I enjoyed it. And when I thought about what was different, it's that my roommate loved to food shop. She said, I realized it's not that I dislike cooking. I hate food shopping. And so then she organized her life so she didn't do any food shopping, and then she was happy to cook. So sometimes looking at times in your past and thinking about, well, what were the circumstances there that contributed to it being possible? Because a lot of times when we're trying to form habits, there have been times when we're being able to be productive, or we're being able to stick to something. But then I think sometimes we don't think about that when we're moving forward.
And you think that's a core nature thing, not a when I was 20, I was a different person than I am now?
Well, I think it's probably a core nature thing.
Okay, thank you.
Is it possible to help others form habits who are, especially those who are trying and failing and you want to do something, but,
Right.
you know, can you help, or does it have to come from within the person, him or herself?
Well, that's an interesting question because if a person truly doesn't want to form a habit, then I think it's very difficult. And sometimes people have what I would call red herring habits, where they're making the sounds, I really should exercise. You're telling me to exercise? Yeah, you're right, I should really exercise. They have no intention of exercising. They're just saying that to get you off their back. They don't really want to. And in that case, it's very hard because they really just they don't really want to. You know, I should stop drinking so much coffee, but I don't really intend to stop drinking coffee. So that's one thing. But often people really do want to change, you know, and they're frustrated because they can't. And I think in that case you can help. And one way you can help is if the person, for many people, not for rebels, but for everybody else, and particularly obligers, crucially for obligers, external accountability is helpful. So if you see a person who is struggling, maybe help them get accountability. You could act as an accountability partner, or you can figure out, you know, whatever the behavior is, what would the accountability be, and build that in. Another thing is to do the behavior yourself. Because in the strategy of other people, I talk about this, we swiftly pick up habits from each other. And this is like why you want to hang out with people who have habits that you like, because their habits are going to rub off on you, your habits are going to rub off on them. I had a funny experience because every year we go on a beach vacation with my in-laws, but this year I went on my book tour instead. So they all went without me. And my husband texted me after 3 days and he said, "You're not here. Everything's starting an hour and a half later." Because I'm an early riser, and I'm like the one saying like, I getting a little hungry. Are you guys ready for dinner? And like everything would start. So one person was affecting the habits of 5 people. Not because I was actually shaking them awake in the morning, but just because so our habits. So if you have good habits yourself, that's going to be helpful. But another really, really good way to be helpful is to make a habit more convenient. We are crazily influenced by how convenient or inconvenient. These are twin strategies, convenience and inconvenience. If something's you don't want someone to do something, make it very inconvenient. If you want them to do something, make it as convenient as possible. And this is where another person can play a role. So if you're not taking your medication, can I get one of those trays where it's divided into the days of the week? And can I load it up every week so that it's all there? And can I put it in front of the coffee pot? So if you're going to have coffee in the morning, you're going to have your pill first. And can I stand there and say, I'm going to check it off the list? You know what I mean? Because the more you make it convenient, the more it's going to make it easy to do. And I had this experience because I wanted to help my now 16-year-old form the habit of working on her homework on Sunday morning, like getting up early and doing some solid work before kind of the day went on. And she agreed to do this, but you can imagine it wasn't something that was like naturally attractive to her. And so I make it as convenient as possible. I wake her up gently. I help her carry her stuff up into my office because I work next to her, which is the strategy of other people. She's working, I'm working on Sunday morning. And I bring her breakfast on a tray with like her cup of tea and like her whole breakfast. If she's chilly, I get her a blanket. Like, I want to make it as easy and pleasant as possible so that habit is I grease the wheels of that habit. So those are some things that a person can do. But if it's an obliger, the absolutely crucial thing is to help them figure out how to build in the external accountability. Because for so many obligers, that's just the thing that it just unleashes whatever the habit is that they're trying to form.
What's your view on like addiction? So people who are not necessarily abstainers or moderators, but like overdoers, and it seems like kind of a core nature thing. So how would they kind of break that?
Well, what do you mean by overdoers versus addicts?
So, I mean, I guess to me, addiction is kind of like characterized by overdoing and like not able to moderate or abstain.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's a very interesting question, and I looked a lot at the studies of addiction because it's very related to habits and particularly how people overcome addiction. In the book, I don't talk about addiction. I don't talk about addiction, compulsion, disorders, or nervous habits. So things like hair twisting or nail biting, which to me seem very different. And it's controversial whether addiction is even real. Many people argue that there isn't really addiction in the way that we think of it now, which is a fairly new idea. But I think that the line between addiction and abstainers is interesting because for a lot of people, it's all or nothing. There is no middle ground, and so I think. And one of the interesting things that in knowing when do you need to control something that seems like you're overdoing it to other people is, do you feel like this is enriching your life? Do you feel like this behavior is good for you and making your life richer and more complete? Or do you feel like it's actually dragging you down and making you feel full of guilt and remorse? And this is actually sometimes very hard to tell. Like, I know several people who, like other people around them be like, you've got an exercise addiction. You exercise too much. But they're like, this is great. I love it. I see my friends. I have all these accomplishments. Like, I love it. I love it. I love it. I'm out in nature. To them, it's enriching. It's not constraining their lives. So sometimes what looks like an addiction to one person isn't for another. But yeah, this idea of, do you manage? I mean, and I just have to say, as an abstainer, that just seems easier to me. It's hard for me even to think of the mindset of somebody who would fight the desire to overdo something by doing it a little bit, because that just seems so challenging. But for some people, that's really what works better.
Thanks. So thanks for coming to Google. I'm a huge fan of the Happiness Project. Love the book. I'm wondering if you still, you had a kind of a whole system of yourself for accountability, all these charts and kind of ways for readers to do that for themselves as well. Do you still do that? Are you still like checking off the boxes of new habits, or do you feel like there's a point where a habit becomes so ingrained that you don't need the accountability anymore?
See, now this is from now, like having gone through all this habit stuff, is that I understand, like, I don't need those anymore. So, but that I think is my upholder nature. So I internalize the checklist, and it's not hard for me to do that. But I think for many people, keeping the checklist probably might be useful indefinitely, because it is a form of self-accountability. And so I don't have to do it. Like, well, I do some things, like I keep a food diary, and for a while I was tracking my sleep, though I stopped doing that. But I think for a lot of people, tracking is very useful for a long time, and it also gives you that sense of accomplishment too. It's very satisfying. And it also keeps you from feeling like you've blown it, because you're like, well, maybe I was, for 3 days I didn't keep my habit, but look, I did for so long, I can get back into that. So there's a lot about it that can be reassuring and energizing. So I think for a lot of people, it really is helpful to keep the checklist going, just depending on what works for you.
Hi, my question is more about sharing the habits that you've seen that's working.
Yes.
I think I always wanted to do something, but I don't really know where to start.
Yeah.
So can you share like maybe 3 things that you've seen people have done that's had positive impacts, and you
In
can
what
try them
area?
out?
Like in what area?
Like, I don't know, like fitness.
Fitness?
Maybe. Yeah, like, I feel like I don't have great ideas.
Right.
I like to borrow from
Right.
someone who has done something. So.
Right. Well, it's on my site. I kind of came up with this too late for it to be in the book, so it's on my site. I have a checklist for habit change, and so the idea is you could put like the habit that you want, and then you could go through and generate ideas based on all the 21 strategies. And so first of all, when you're trying to form a habit, you want it to be as specific as possible. So you wouldn't want to form the habit of being fit. Obviously, that's a description. But you'd want to be like, I want to have the habit of going for a run every day. Or I want to have the habit of walking to work, or whatever it might be. And then you can go through all the 21 strategies and figure out, okay, well, how can I make this more convenient? How can I make it more inconvenient to do the opposite? How can I use pairing, which is when you do 2 things at once? How can I give myself healthy treats that are going to keep me energized? How can I think about being with other people? How can I think about my tendencies? So when it comes to fitness, like some obligers have told me hilarious strategies that they've used for fitness. Like my favorite, 2 obligers decided that they would be workout buddies, and at the end of the workout, they each trade a shoe. So if you don't come tomorrow, I can't work out because you've got my shoe. You have to come, So there's a lot of things like that. But it's like this. But for a rebel, that would make them not go, because they'd be like, no one can tell me what to do. I'm not going to go just because it's inconvenient for you, because I don't feel like it. And so for them, that would be counterproductive. So it's again like figuring out, well, what's going to work for me? Or a questioner might be like, well, I'm supposed to be doing this gym routine, but I'm not convinced it's the best for me. I really need to put in the time. Like the desire to make an Excel spreadsheet is a very big, often a tip-off that someone's a questioner. And, like I had a friend who was a questioner, and, she wanted to start eating more healthfully, and she interviewed 10 nutritionists and had an Excel spreadsheet and ranked them on a 1 to 10 scale on 7 different questions. And then she really believed in what she was doing, and then she was able to stick to it. So again, if a questioner might say, I'm going to look at these 7 different types of exercise and decide which is the one that's going to do for me what I want in the most efficient, best use of my time way, and really put the time in. Because a lot of times when questioners can't do something, like a questioner was like, why don't I take my vitamins? I got all these vitamins. The doctor told me to take them. I don't take them. And I said, well, do you think you need to take them? She said, no. I was like, if you thought that they really mattered, you would take them. So part of it is just figuring out yourself so that then you can shape the habit in a way that's going to work for you, because there's all different kinds of strategies to use depending on what works for you. But some things are counterproductive. The same strategy can work for somebody and actually be counterproductive for somebody else.
Cool. We have time for one more question, and I don't want to forget to mention your blog and your podcast.
Yes, I have a new podcast called Happier with Gretchen Rubin, which is we were I think number 9 on iTunes after we launched, and it's with my sister Elizabeth Kraft. And if you've read the book, she's in the book with her on her treadmill desk. Logan showed me the treadmill desk here. I'm very envious because I can't have a treadmill desk in my office. It's too small. So it's really fun. We talk about happiness and good habits and our own experiences, and it's really fun. So check it out, Happier with Gretchen Rubin.
And signing up for the newsletter.
And and I passed around. Oh, I forgot to pass around the sheet. Oh, will you start passing it now?
Sure.
Or I guess
sorry,
what
it's
we'll
next
do,
to you.
Shoot. It's right next to you. Yeah, I have a sign-up sheet. If you could, I have a monthly newsletter. I have a daily happiness quotation. I have a monthly book club where I recommend a happiness or habits book, a work of children's literature because I'm a children's literature freak, and then one eccentric pick, where I get to pick a book that I love but that I can't, in all fairness, say that I think everybody would love. So those are a
When we
bunch of
post the
things.
video, we'll put a link
Oh,
to
good,
the
good, good.
newsletter.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, this was great.
This
Thank
was
you so
great.
much
Thanks
for coming.
so much.